Welcome back to the Sunday Scripture Podcast. It's a very special week, and we are reading the story of Easter Sunday, finding the empty tomb. Before we started, we were talking about different versions of the Gospels and the different things that they emphasized, which led us to think, let's read each story and see what we notice. You're never going to hear that in worship, and maybe the discussion of it in the podcast gives you a different insight as you walk in the door. So this is the women going to the empty tomb in the Gospel of Matthew 28, verse 1. Now, after the Sabbath, towards the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the sepulchre. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for the angel of the Lord descended from heaven, came and rolled back the stone and sat upon it. His appearance was like lightning, and his raiment was white as snow. And for fear of him, the guards trembled and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who is crucified. He's not here, for he's risen as he said. Come, see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead. And behold, he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him. Lo, I have told you." So they departed quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy, and ran to tell the disciples. And behold, Jesus met them and said, "Hail!" And they came up, took hold of his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brethren to go to Galilee, and there they will see me."
So a couple of things pop out, specifically the earthquake, the idea of the earth moving. His appearance was like lightning, raiment white as snow. The very description that you're seeing here would have hearkened people back to a time of the ancestors, namely Moses receiving the law, the up on the mountain, the earth kind of shaking and moving, all of creation being caught up in this scene. And then the angel descending. I've never noticed that before. For the angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone. And so they actually witness it, according to Matthew, they witnessed the stone being rolled back.
Rolled back the stone and then sat upon it. That's something I don't think I've noticed before either. That's an interesting detail.
It is. Brad, we were fortunate to go to Israel with our ordination class, and I saw something there that I did not realize, and maybe you can check factually. I always pictured a boulder, and I don't know why, because they would have had to have gotten it there in the first place, but I just pictured a boulder that would be nearly impossible. And when we went to a site that celebrated this, it was more like a track that had a massive stone that would roll like a wheel. What are your thoughts on that and what I pictured it was going to be?
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the more controversial questions that people have and that they wrestle with over there. Because I know the exact spot that you're talking about is the Garden Tomb. Interesting enough, we were just there a few months back, and that large round stone is no longer there at the Garden Tomb. They removed it for several different reasons, but there was on the side of the road. Our guide pointed out, traveling one day, here's another example of a tomb, and it too had the rounded, nice stone that was in a track that you could roll out in front of the hole that was led into the tombs. I don't necessarily know that that's exactly how this played out. Like, it's nice and it's pretty, but the idea of it being like a perfectly rounded stone, especially even though Jesus was buried in a grave of a rich person, because it was Joseph of Arimathea, I still don't think that would have necessarily meant like a large stone with a track and all of that. So I'm kind of going more towards what your initial response would be of some just major, like a big rock that kind of was pushed in and covered it. rather than something that was as clean as what we're describing.
In a way, I thought, oh, that makes way more sense. But in another way, I thought, oh, that's not that big a deal that it was rolled. I'm not diminishing this story, obviously. Just logistically, I looked at it and thought, oh, okay. But as you said, that's a controversial take.
Well, what the language in Matthew says, rolled back the stone. Well, let's take a look at what the other gospels say in a moment. But Joe, a quick question about the angel's appearance. Is this appearance much like or anything like the angels appearing to the shepherds at his birth?
That's exactly what occurred to me. I like that you say it. Bookends to what happened at the start of the story. I like that.
So it's interesting because we're looking at these 4 different gospels in comparison, and to show you how we merge these stories into like one big Jesus story, the angels appearing to the shepherds actually appears in Luke. That's in Luke's gospel. So we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah,
that's interesting. All right.
Joe, one other thing before, and I'm anxious to get to the other gospels to see listen to the other accounts. But the other thing that jumps out at me here is that Jesus reveals himself to the women. The women see him first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a common take among people who are debating whether women can declare the word of God or not. And say, well, the first ones that brought the best news ever were women. And we've emphasized that before, not only in the podcast, but in sermons as well. That's absolutely true. A man that was supposed to be dead is not, and the guards are trembling and became like dead men. So the ones who represented the authority of that area, the soldiers of you'd figure they're Roman soldiers, Brad?
Yes, that's correct. They are Roman soldiers.
All right. So representing the most powerful army, wanting to keep their thumb on anything that's going to get people amped up or fired up, anything that messes with the business of collecting taxes or keeping order, they are now dead. And Jesus is not. Have you ever felt fear and great joy at the exact same time? Maybe when your child goes into an event and you're so proud of them for being there, for being in that moment, and also fear like you want it to work out. You want it to go well for them.
I think maybe having a child to begin with is probably a time of fear and great joy. Right? Yes. I think it's true for any kind of transition, right? A new job, walking into a new job on the first time, somebody retiring after being in a career for so long. Just thinking about how prominent that is, a new relationship that somebody enters into. All of those things, I think any kind of massive change in our lives, I think there's a good, healthy balance of fear and joy. And so I think that's a pretty cool moment to humanize this for these women.
Yes.
Can we take a step back? With the question I had right away is, because we didn't cover it in the text, it comes in 27 verse 62. Is that right? Why are there guards there in the first place? Why are the guards passing out from fear or falling dead?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, because of the nature of who Jesus was and the fear that Pilate had regarding who he claimed to be and who the people hoped he would be or believed that he would be. There was this mentality that Pilate would say, well, the easy thing, and this probably says more about Pilate than it does anything else, but Pilate said, well, what are the chances that they go and they steal his body in the middle of the night and then they claim that he is risen? That you can almost feel Pilate going like, well, that's what I would do. So let's guard against that. And so he puts guards in place in order to prevent the stealing of the body.
And the angel showing up, descending from heaven, the guards lose it, pass out, are dead, one or the other, whatever has been described there. And the angel tells the women, don't be afraid, and go tell the disciples to meet Jesus. He's going to be in Galilee. But then on their way, they run into him, right? And so they get to see him themselves for sure. And that's Matthew's account.
Yes, that's right.
How about they take hold of his feet? Does that tie to the washing of the feet? Does that tie to what Mary did at his feet? Does it tie to the wounds on his feet? Just general idea of worship, of falling to one's feet.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like falling down, and that's just what they have to cling on to. I had this image of kids grabbing onto your feet when they're young, and trying to walk with them as they're holding onto your feet. It's a sign of affection, a sign of love. I think at some point it's also like, don't leave us, don't leave us again. I think that's being conveyed there.
That makes a lot of sense. 8, 9, 10 weeks ago, we talked about Jesus turning his face to Jerusalem theologically, mentally, physically, and the journey that he took to Jerusalem. He says, tell the boys to go to Galilee. Let's get out of here. He is gone from Jerusalem and back to the birthplace of his earthly ministry, which I think is something. How about this one more thing about Matthew? The author of the Gospel of Matthew's concern for tying to the Old Testament. You mentioned that with the lightning and kind of the nature elements that would be found in some of the major stories of the Old Testament. If we're going to frame a story and you're the author of the Gospel of Matthew, you're going to be truly tied to the Old Testament.
Yeah, from the beginning to the very end. I mean, that's what we're seeing here.
Mm-hmm. So let's transition to Mark. Mark 16, verse 1. And when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, they went to the tomb where the sun had risen. And they were saying to one another, who will roll away the stone for us from the door of the tomb? And looking up, they saw the stone was rolled back. It was very large. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe, and they were amazed. And he said to them, do not be amazed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is risen. He's not here. See the place where they laid him. But go, tell the disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him, as told to you. And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had come upon them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Carl, what do you notice about that one?
It's completely different in a few ways. One, they don't describe the man in white as an angel necessarily, and the man in white is inside the tomb. And they also explain that the women were coming to anoint Jesus's body with spices. So that kind of gives us a reason as to why they were coming to the tomb in the first place. So those are the things that jump out to me. Oh, the other thing is that they don't see Jesus by the time we get to verse 8. They're fleeing and they're afraid. We don't see that they run into him and he comforts them.
Brad, how about Mark's version in general of a story being more succinct, having more confusion, people trying to figure out what on earth is going on?
Yeah, Mark is the shortest of all four Gospels, and so it kind of is very quick as it moves through. It's told in a pattern in which the word "and" is used more in its gospel than any of the other gospels combined. So it's like Mark has Jesus moving around, and this happened, and this happened, and then this happened. And it kind of continues even here with this story to where it's very condensed. The stone's already rolled back, so they don't witness that either. That it's just very brief. And as Carl said, there's no appearance here. Like, Jesus doesn't appear in this story, which is pretty fascinating. The thing that always jumps out at me for Mark's story, the way in which this ends, and there is a longer ending, and I don't think we need to read that for tonight. You can read that on your own if you want to, but in this short ending, where most scholars believe this gospel actually really ended with them running out and not telling anybody, which I love the idea that that's how this story ends, because we know somebody had to get told. We're still telling it. And so what to do with that, or how to hold that with the other understanding of the resurrection narrative and tension that we read in other gospels, it's fascinating.
So we don't have lightning. We don't have soldiers. We do have Salome, and we do have spices. Do you know who Salome is?
I do not. She's just a woman that's with them. Yeah. I don't exactly know what her tradition, like what the tradition is behind her.
Okay. And they're bringing spices because they wanted the opportunity to care for his body the way anyone who's ever lost a loved one would. But the urgency of the moment, right up against the Sabbath in that holy week, forced them to leave him. And we just can't fathom that, having to leave that person in a way that we couldn't care for them in one way or another. I guess soldiers have that horrible truth that they can't care for the one that they've been with, that they've lost, that they now don't have a chance in that ripping heartache in that moment has been building in their thoughts, in their dreams as they wake up, wondering if any of that was real. They have to wait. What would it be? Not really 48 hours. It's more like, would you say like 36 hours? Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, 36 hours is a good guess. This is one of the reasons why I always pause when we think about 3 days in the tomb, because it's like, but it's only 36 hours, but it's like 3 calendar days, right? I mean, or three days on the calendar. It's like, it's Friday, it's Saturday. Now they're here on the third day. It's the Sunday.
And so they're taking these spices to anoint him, to honor him for what he was to them. And when they get there, there's the imagery of the sun that was risen. There's also a young man. Young man was not in Salome, nor the young man were not in Matthew. I noticed that it points out Jesus of Nazareth, tying back to his humanity, tying back to every reason that people said he was not going to be what he said he was going to be. How could someone who's a carpenter's son be anything significant? How could someone who's from Nazareth do anything significant? His own disciples, before they were disciples, wondered that out loud, pointing that out. That's not in Matthew.
Yeah, the other thing that I did notice is there were no guard descriptions, and that they don't call this guy in white an angel, but that's what we assume because we're familiar with the other gospels.
Yeah, and I would want to say with that, of like, in the purest form, an angel is just a messenger. So while Mark doesn't use that language, like the actual Greek word for angel is, I think it's angelos, is like literally messenger. It's like a messenger of God, somebody who brings God's message.
That's helpful.
I want to ask a really kind of a scandalous question more than anything else with this. Have you ever thought about the fact that the women do not tend to the body of their dead friend out of religious obligation? I mean, we have a whole religion that's based upon this individual. So obviously they didn't, like, they're not in our place. This is you got to differentiate that. but they are choosing not to honor a loved one because of a religious duty that they have to practice the Sabbath. This is not Mary, Jesus's mother. This is Mary, the mother of James, and Mary Magdalene, who were close to him. These were people he loved. Let's just say that they are a family unit. Mm-hmm. The family unit is not taking care of the body of their loved one, their family member, on Friday evening because the Sabbath has already started, meaning they are honoring their religious tradition more than the importance of their religious tradition lies to them more important than taking care of the body of this man. The scandalous question would be is like, would we as Christians ever think to do something like that?
And as people who have led worship services, both weddings, funerals, worship, baptism, whatever, people come up with all kinds of crazy requests for their family to bend. They want to bend the religious practice for their loved one. Those people, you're saying, stuck to the religious practice and did not. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think that it's kind of convicting and a tad bit scandalous for us as Christians.
It is. To Brad's point about the brevity, this story starts in Matthew at chapter 28. It starts in Mark in chapter 16. It starts in Luke in chapter 24. It starts in John in chapter 20. So Mark, way shorter. Matthew is tying his story more to the Old Testament. Luke is providing more context for people who don't necessarily know this entire story that preceded Jesus. Let's see what he says. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they went to the tomb, taking the spices which they had prepared, and they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they went in, they did not find the body. They were perplexed about this. Behold, 2 men stood by them in dazzling apparel. And as they were frightened and bowed their faces to the ground, the men said to them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? Remember how he told you, while he was in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and on the 3rd day rise." And they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed an idle tale, as they did not believe them. Whoa. Carl, what do you see?
Well, there are more women involved. We have 2 men and not 1 angel. No speaking of the guards, no earthquake. And when the women go to tell, as opposed to not tell, they're not believed. So this 3rd account is yet dramatically different than the other 2 in a couple of ways, right? Mm-hmm. I think the common, Luke and Mark have the account of they had spices. So I think Mark and Luke describe the reason why they were coming to the tomb, but only Matthew describes the actual rolling of the stone, describing it as an earthquake and that an angel or a messenger is showing up. And it mentions the guards. I think in Mark and Luke, we're not hearing about the guards. So in the spirit of comparing the Gospels account, I think this 3rd account is yet even more different.
Mm-hmm. So we had Mary Magdalene and Mary. We had Mary Magdalene, Mary, mother James, and Salome. Now we have Mary Magdalene and Joanna, and Mary, the mother of James, and the other women. Brad, what do you notice?
What if I told you Joanna's other name was Salome?
Oh, cool. Okay.
It's not. I'm just kidding.
Oh, really?
No. Yeah, I mean, I noticed all the same things that Carl pointed out about the difference between all of these. The description of he was told to be delivered into the hands of sinful men. I mean, this is the first time we're hearing about the people who did this to Jesus. But again, we get no Jesus in this story. Now, for people who read the Bible, they know that one of the most popular post-Easter stories is the Road to Emmaus, which is what follows what we just read. So the first two people who actually lay eyes upon Jesus are travelers that are not connected really to anything that we've heard thus far. And they're the ones, and it's only when they come and tell that they're actually believed, so that the women aren't believed. Now, there's probably women listening to this going, yeah, exactly. Women are never believed. So we got that working against us, guys, a little bit, is that they didn't believe the women when they told them.
I certainly see that the Son of Man must be delivered. So we had Jesus of Nazareth tied to his humanity. I'm looking at Mark. There's not really a title in Mark for him. And Son of Man that we talked about last week, again, ties into humanity, but not to a particular geographical place. It's a person who is made subject to human frailty and made subject to human authority. He said the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified. This is on my mind. There was a marquee on a church on the way to the mountains this week that said, the love of Jesus started with 3 rusty nails. And I thought, first, there's the propensity to tie Jesus only to this sacrifice. It is the only thing, and that's why he came to earth. But second, to say that love started that day. It started way before that day. In the telling of the story, in the gathering of these people who would not have been gathered in any other format, would not have been the ones who were the messengers. It started with that gathering and the telling of the love that preceded him in his earthly ministry, the love of God. So something about that very much upset me. But this one, more than the others, ties him to that sacrifice of coming to Jerusalem.
Yeah, but I want to point out, and this is what I point out with people who make that point about how much the crossbeams and the 3 rusty nails, which, how do we know that the nails are rusty anyways? But that's another side point. There were thousands of people who were crucified. Thousands. Only one of them walked out of the tomb.
Yeah.
Joe, one other thing here in Luke, the messenger says the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men. He's reminding them what Jesus told them. Remember that we've been reading from Matthew most of this month with the parables, and we've heard Jesus refer to himself as the Son of Man a couple of times in Matthew, right? So it's interesting to hear that same term is now recounted by the messenger in the Luke gospel.
It is. And speaking of the difficulty of that sinful nature, this is the only one that mentions a number, like 11. Going back to the disciples, the one who initiated the capture of Jesus, Judas, that would lead to his death, is going to be dead and Jesus is alive. Thinking that was going to be the end of that story, with the money that was exchanged. It's now a transition again, somewhat like those soldiers became like dead men.
So what does John say?
Now, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. So she ran, and she went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they've laid him." Peter then came out with the other disciple and they went toward the tomb. They both ran, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. And stooping to look in, he saw the linen cloths lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went to the tomb. He saw the linen cloths lying, and the napkin which had been on his head, not lying with the linen cloths, but rolled up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple, who reached the tomb first, also went in, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not know the scripture, that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to their homes. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb, and as she wept, she stooped to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white, sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and the other at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "Because they've taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they've laid him." Saying this, she turned round and saw Jesus standing, but she did not know it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom do you seek?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." And she turned to him in Hebrew, Rabboni, which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not hold me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brethren and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and said to the disciples, "I've seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. So the theory that the Gospel of Mark was written first and Matthew and Luke expanded on that story, and that John completely built his own story, his own framing, is absolutely on display in the telling of this story. Brad, you mentioned at the start, before we started recording, this is the most exciting version, maybe the one told most often.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a lot more elaborate. It's definitely full of details that we love to pick apart and we love to focus on and think about and talk about, especially because there's just so much action, and it's amongst the people whom we've come to know through these stories throughout the different readings that we find in John's gospel. Is Peter has a significant role, the disciple whom Jesus loved, who we assume is John, this Mary Magdalene. All of these folks we've learned about them throughout the gospel, and now they are the key characters that are in play during this scene.
Carl, what do you see?
Mary goes to tell the disciples, or at least a couple of them, that the tomb is empty, and they go to see for themselves. They go and see for themselves, and then they go back home and they believe. They go back home without seeing Jesus, or without seeing what we assume is the messenger or an angel with him. Or did I misunderstand what you were reading? Do we have two people in the tomb who ask Mary, "Why are you weeping?" Or is it just one, and she doesn't recognize Jesus, then she recognized him, and so that's why I think there are two. Help me here, guys.
No, I mean, there's two in the tomb after the other disciples leave.
Right.
And so there's two messengers that are in there. Right? Isn't that, yeah, the text says that. And she saw two angels in white. They said to her, "Why are you weeping?" Yeah. And after she says that, she turns around and sees Jesus behind her.
So Jesus reveals himself to Mary, to the women in John, just like in Matthew's account. But the difference is, my understanding of Matthew, or at least the way I imagine it, is they run into him on their way away from the tomb. In John's account, he's there in the tomb behind her.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of lingering. I know that sounds weird to say, but it's like he's just kind of there. He just appears there. There's two figures. And again, John uses angels. So there's two angels, according to John, that are there. And they ask her, "Why are you weeping?" She responds to them and then turns around to see Jesus, I would assume, at some point at the entry of the tomb itself.
You briefly mentioned the walk to Emmaus following this story in Luke, in which the two people that are unnamed don't recognize him for who he is. There's a parallel in this gospel that she doesn't recognize who he is, thinking he's the gardener. Their post-resurrection stories in many ways have confusion on the part of the people. Perhaps it's their mind telling him he absolutely could not be here. Perhaps his appearance is different, perhaps both. But some action, whether it's breaking bread or telling them the story or saying their name, different things that Jesus does, pops them into a alerted status where they see him and know who he is. That's a parallel as well.
Well, this is the first time that I've actually in one sitting compared all four accounts. And I'm actually surprised at when you pick it apart, how different all four are. There absolutely are similarities, of course. But to Brad's point earlier in our conversation, the common denominator here is that thousands of people were crucified, but only one walked away from the tomb. And that's the point of the story.
I think it's important to note as well, there are people when I expressed interest in ministry, and Brad, you can say whether how much this was the case or not. And one different experience the two of us had is I served churches in a rural context prior to even seminary and throughout seminary. I was 6 weeks out from graduating from the Citadel, serving a church, not knowing the simple, though I've been in church for 22 years, I didn't know the simple things to do as part of the taking up the offering. Well, it's friendly and good to them and visited them. So they were like, cool. And they were used to somebody who was clueless and coaching that person up. But when the time approached for me to go to seminary, I went there in the middle of June. I started seminary in August at Emory in Atlanta. They were concerned in some way, they joke about it, but in joking, sometimes there's truth, that I would lose a simple understanding of the text and start to get into a deep study of the text and thus question my faith. Now, the other difference, Brad, between me and you is I was a history major because religion was not offered at the Citadel. You studied religion when a lot of people do that in college and think, whoa, I didn't see these differences here. That either sparks my faith and interest or it crushes it. Now, I read these not to point out differences, to pick it apart in a way that, well, obviously there's some flaws here. I read it to see those different points of emphasis that each writer described. It strengthens my faith, and I encourage anyone that's listening to understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think this can be a point of contention with people to say, there's all these different differences here, and so which one's right? And the response I would say is they're all right. Like, they're all correct. I think it's beautiful to hold these stories, to hold them in tension even, and to say, no, this is it. This is the story of our faith tradition. And it's not going to line up. This isn't science. This isn't, this is not what the Bible was intended to do and to be. Instead, it's a story that binds us one to each other and to God's own self in Jesus Christ.
And Carl, I'll give you a comp from one of the very first shows. I give you time travel back to see the original Hamilton cast, New York, food, hotels. You're there for 6 days. Your family of 4 goes. And I ask you what happened in New York. How different would your 4 stories be?
Yeah. I mean, that's a perfect example. All 4 of us, all 4 family members would have very different stories, hopefully everyone would agree that the show is fantastic.
Mhm. Also, very different lengths of your stories, I would bet.
Different
Very.
links. I would probably focus a lot on the food before and after.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's a perfect analogy, perfect point.
There's
So
no food in these texts, Carl. I'm sorry. Our food podcast got put on hold for this text.
we'll certainly make up for it on other occasions. So we spent a good bit of time on this. I'll ask you one last question. Which gospel would you read on Sunday? Carl, which one would you go with?
I think I would go with Luke's because I like the way our messenger quotes Jesus as saying the Son of Man.
Mhm.
Don't you remember when he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Galilee, that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified,
Mhm.
and on the third day rise?
Mhm.
I like Luke's account there for that reason.
I picked Luke for the exact same reason. I don't know if I would have done that before we started. He's a teacher at all times. I love teaching. I would go with Luke. What about you, Brad?
I think in this season, and I'm actually not preaching on Easter Sunday. Megan is my wife, so I get a free pass on this. But I think this season of my life and in the world, I'm going with Mark. The ending, and they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had come upon them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Just how much fear there is in the world right now, just how frustrated we are with all that's going on in our country, and the tension that we feel towards our, just everything. And yet, my Easter message would be, and yet, the story is told that the tomb was empty.
Sick.
I love reading these stories, seeing more about them, learning more about them. Thank you, Carl, for joining. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, everyone, for joining with us. Thank you, everyone. Have a great week, and join us again next time.